The alarm clock's harsh buzz cut through the morning silence at 5:45 a.m., same as it had every weekday for the past 3 years. Jack Reynolds' hand found the snooze button with practiced precision, buying himself 9 more minutes of blessed quiet before the day demanded everything he had to give. In the dim light filtering through their apartment's single-bedroom window, he could make out the gentle rise and fall of Lucas's chest in the twin bed across the room. 8 years old and still small enough that the superhero comforter his mother had bought him seemed to swallow him whole. Lisa's last gift to their son. Jack's throat tightened the way it always did when these thoughts crept in, unbidden. 3 years hadn't dulled the sharp edges of grief, only taught him to carry them more carefully. The second alarm was less forgiving. Jack swung his legs over the side of his narrow bed, bare feet meeting the cold hardwood floor that creaked no matter how carefully he stepped. Their studio apartment in Pinewood wasn't much 620 square feet of necessity carved out of an old warehouse, but it was theirs. The rent was manageable. The neighborhood was safe enough for Lucas to walk to the corner store. And Mrs. Chen next door kept an eye on things when Jack worked his night shifts. "Morning, buddy," Jack whispered, gently shaking Lucas's shoulder. "Time to get moving." Lucas's eyes opened slowly, the same deep brown as his mother's, framed by dark lashes that had always made Lisa joke about the unfairness of good genes being wasted on males. 5 more minutes, he mumbled, a ritual they performed every morning. "You know the rule. We eat breakfast together or not at all." This was enough to get Lucas moving. The boy treasured their morning routine almost as much as Jack did these quiet moments before the world intruded, before homework and work schedules, and the constant calculation of what they could afford versus what they needed. Their kitchen occupied one corner of the main room, a galley-style afterthought with barely enough counter space for the coffee maker Jack had inherited from his parents and the toaster that had been a wedding gift 12 years ago. The refrigerator hummed too loudly, and the left burner on the stove required jiggling the handle just right. But Jack had learned to work with what he had. "Scrambled or sunny side up?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "Scrambled with cheese. If we have it," they had cheese. Jack had made sure of that yesterday. Even though it meant choosing between the good cheddar Lucas liked and the generic brand that cost $2 less, some battles were worth fighting for. His son's happiness at breakfast was one of them, while the eggs cooked. Lucas emerged from the bathroom with his hair sticking up in impossible directions, dressed in yesterday's jeans and a t-shirt that proclaimed him a future astronaut. Secure. The shirt was too big. Jack had bought it in a larger size, hoping it would last longer, but Lucas wore it with pride. "Dad, can I tell you about the dream I had?" Lucas asked, climbing onto the kitchen stool that was slightly too tall for him. Jack divided the eggs between two mismatched plates, adding a slice of toast to each. "Let's hear it." "Spaceman. I was on Mars, but it wasn't all red and dusty like in the pictures. There were trees and rivers, and the sky was purple instead of that weird orange color." Lucas's voice dropped to a whisper. "Mom was there too." Jack's hand stilled on the coffee cup. "What was she doing?" "Building a house, a big one with lots of windows so we could see the purple sky. She said when you got there, we'd all live in it together." 3 years, and Lucas still included Lisa in his future plans. Jack had stopped trying to correct this gentle fiction. The grief counselor had assured him it was normal, healthy even. Children processed loss differently than adults. They held on to hope longer, believed in impossible reunions, trusted that love could overcome even death. "That sounds like a beautiful dream," Jack said finally. They ate in comfortable silence, Lucas swinging his legs from the kitchen stool, Jack standing at the counter with his coffee growing cold as he mentally reviewed the day ahead. Drop Lucas at school by 7:45, pick up his brother-in-law's suit from the dry cleaner. He'd need it for the Peterson wedding this Saturday, his one guaranteed big tip of the month. Grocery shopping with whatever was left from last night's fares. 3 hours of sleep if he was lucky before starting his evening shift. The mathematics of survival had become second nature. Every dollar earned, every expense weighed, every decision filtered through the lens of what was best for Lucas. The private school tuition alone consumed 60% of Jack's income. But Pinewood Elementary had been failing when Lisa died, and the boy deserved better than overcrowded classrooms and outdated textbooks. "Dad!" Lucas's voice carried that particular tone that meant a serious question was coming. "Why do you look so tired all the time?" Jack set down his coffee cup, considering his answer. Lucas was too young for the full truth of the credit card bills, the constant worry about car repairs, the way Jack's back ached from sleeping on a mattress that had seen better days 5 years ago. But he was also too smart for empty reassurances. "I work hard so you can have good things," Jack said. "Sometimes working hard means being tired. But you're always tired, even on Sundays." Sundays were supposed to be their day together. Jack tried to keep them sacred, no work unless absolutely necessary. But even then, he couldn't fully shut off the part of his brain that was always calculating, always planning, always worried about the next unexpected expense that would throw their careful budget into chaos. "I'm not too tired for what matters," Jack said, ruffling Lucas's hair. "Speaking of which, don't forget you have that science project due Friday." "The solar system model." "I know." Lucas's face lit up with the enthusiasm he reserved for anything involving space. "Mrs. Patterson said I could use styrofoam balls, but I was thinking maybe we could make it more realistic, like with proper scaling and orbital mechanics." At 8 years old, Lucas used phrases like orbital mechanics with the same casual confidence other kids said video games. His teacher had mentioned gifted program testing, but that was a luxury for families who could afford the additional fees and transportation to the magnet school across town. "We'll figure something out," Jack promised, though he was already calculating the cost of craft supplies against the electric bill due next week. They finished breakfast in their usual rush, Lucas gathering his backpack and homework folder, while Jack packed the lunch that would need to last until dinner, peanut butter and jelly again. But with the good grape jelly Lucas preferred, an apple that wasn't quite as crisp as Jack would have liked, and a juice box that cost more per ounce than gasoline, but made his son smile. The walk to school was their second favorite part of the day, 8 blocks through a neighborhood that was slowly gentrifying, past the corner store where Mr. Kim always waved from behind bulletproof glass, past the community garden where elderly residents tended vegetables with the patience of people who understood that good things took time. Lucas chatted about his upcoming science project, about the book he was reading about black holes, about his friend Marcus who had gotten a new telescope for his birthday. Jack listened with half his attention, the other half cataloging the sounds of the neighborhood waking up delivery trucks, distant sirens, the rumble of the subway beneath their feet. Harbor Bay Academy sat at the end of a tree-lined street that could have been beautiful if the trees weren't struggling and the building wasn't showing its age. Built in the 1960s, it had the institutional look of a place designed for efficiency rather than inspiration. But the teachers were dedicated. The principal knew every student's name, and Lucas seemed happy there. "Remember Mrs. Chen picks you up today," Jack said as they reached the school's front steps. "I'll be home by 7:30. "I know. Dad, we're going to work on my project. Remember orbital mechanics?" Lucas grinned and gave Jack a quick hug before disappearing into the building with the easy confidence of a child who knew he was loved. Jack watched until the boy was safely inside, then began the long walk back to their apartment. The day stretched ahead of him with a familiar weight of routine, but as he walked, Jack found himself thinking about Lucas's dream, the purple sky on Mars, the house with many windows, the impossible reunion that his son's heart still believed in. Maybe that was the difference between 8 and 32. At 8, you could still believe that love was stronger than loss, that family was permanent, that the people you needed would always find their way back to you. At 32, you knew better, but you also knew that believing in impossible things was sometimes the only way to get through the day. The crumpled business card in his wallet, the one he'd given to a stranger in an evening gown, seemed to whisper a possibility he couldn't quite name. But that was a story for another day, another chapter in a life that had already held more plot twists than seemed fair. For now, there was work to be done, bills to be paid, and a son who needed to know that even when the world felt uncertain, some things remained constant: love, dedication, the promise that no matter how tired his father got, Lucas would always come first. The walk home took 20 minutes. By the time Jack reached their building, he was already thinking about the evening ahead, the strangers who would climb into his car, the stories they would or wouldn't tell, the tips that would determine whether Lucas's science project would be made with premium materials or whatever they could scrape together from the dollar store. Some nights changed everything, but most nights were just another step in the long journey of doing whatever it took to give his son the future he deserved. The business card crinkled softly in his wallet as he climbed the stairs to their apartment. Soon it would become something more than a forgotten gesture of kindness. Soon it would become the thread that would weave their small, careful life into something larger and more beautiful than either of them could have imagined. But for now, it was just another morning, another day, another chance to prove that love was enough to build a life on, even when that life felt held together with determination and hope. The night everything changed started like any other Tuesday. Jack had kissed Lucas goodnight at 8:30, left him in Mrs. Chen's capable hands, and started his shift with a full tank of gas and cautious optimism about the evening's earnings. The Uber app glowed softly on his dashboard, a digital lifeline in the economic reality of single parenthood. His first few rides were routine: a college student heading to the library, an elderly couple returning from dinner at their anniversary restaurant, a nurse starting her overnight shift at the hospital. Each fare added a few more dollars to the careful calculations running constantly in the back of his mind. Lucas's school fees were due in 2 weeks, and Jack was still $475 short. At 11:47 p.m., the app pinged with a pickup request from the financial district. The location marker showed a street corner outside Skyline Tower, one of those glass monuments to wealth that scrape the sky above the city's beating heart. Jack had driven past the building countless times but never had reason to stop. The people who lived and worked in places like that didn't usually need rides from drivers like him. But money was money, and Tuesday nights were typically slow. He accepted the ride and navigated through the sparse, late-night traffic toward downtown. The street was empty when he arrived, illuminated by the harsh glow of security lights and the soft ember of decorative lamps that probably cost more than Jack's monthly rent. He checked the pickup location twice, then slowly rolled down the street, scanning for his passenger. That's when he saw her. She was crumpled against a storefront like a discarded evening gown, which wasn't far from the truth. The dress was clearly expensive, midnight blue silk that caught the light even in her awkward position. But it was wrinkled and stained as if she'd been sitting there for hours. Her dark hair had escaped whatever elaborate style it had been arranged in, falling across her face in tangled waves. Jack pulled over and sat for a moment, engine idling, trying to decide what to do. This wasn't his passenger. The app showed he was looking for someone named Michael K., but the woman was clearly in distress, possibly in danger, and the street was deserted. Every instinct his father had taught him about helping people in trouble warred with the practical voice that reminded him he couldn't afford to get involved in complicated situations. The practical voice lost. He parked and approached carefully, the way you might approach an injured animal, slowly, with clear intentions. "Miss, are you okay?" She looked up at the sound of his voice, and Jack's breath caught, even disheveled and clearly intoxicated. She was stunning in a way that belonged on magazine covers or red carpets. But it was her eyes that stopped him, dark, intelligent, and filled with a loneliness so profound it made his chest ache. She began, then stopped, blinking slowly as if trying to bring him into focus. "Are you Michael?" "No, I'm Jack. I think I'm here for Michael, but he doesn't seem to be around." "Are you waiting for a ride?" She laughed, a sound that held no humor. "I've been waiting for a ride my whole life. Just not the kind you mean." The comment was strange enough that it should have been a red flag, but something in her tone, bitter wisdom wrapped in vulnerability, reminded Jack of the way Lisa used to talk when she was tired of pretending everything was fine. "Look, I don't know what your situation is, but you can't stay out here alone. It's not safe." Jack glanced around the empty street. "Do you have somewhere to go?" "Someone I can call. Penthouse, Skyline Tower, 62nd floor." She struggled to sit up straighter, and Jack caught a whiff of expensive perfume mixed with alcohol. Not drunk enough to be dangerous, but definitely not sober. I can pay you whatever the fare is. Can you walk? I think so. She couldn't. Not really. Jack ended up supporting most of her weight as they made their way to his car, her designer heels clicking unsteadily on the pavement. She was taller than Lisa had been, but still small enough that helping her felt natural. Like the countless times he carried a sleepy Lucas from the couch to bed. His car, a 10-year-old Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door and an air freshener that had stopped working months ago, seemed particularly shabby with her folded into the passenger seat. But she didn't seem to notice or care. She leaned back against the headrest and closed her eyes. Skyline Tower, she repeated softly. The one that looks like it's trying to touch heaven but doesn't understand that heaven doesn't want to be touched. That's poetic. I used to write poetry before I learned that words don't pay for themselves. Jack started the car and pulled into traffic. The ride to Skyline Tower would take 15 minutes, maybe 20 with the construction on Fifth Avenue. He found himself curious about this woman who spoke in metaphors and wore loneliness, like expensive jewelry. Bad night, he asked. Bad life, she said with a short laugh. But tonight was the exclamation point. They drove in comfortable silence for several blocks. She didn't elaborate, and Jack didn't push. He'd learned that sometimes people needed to sit with their thoughts before they could make sense of them out loud. What's your name? She asked suddenly. Jack Reynolds. Victoria Hamilton. She paused, as if testing whether the name meant anything to him. When he didn't react, she seemed to relax slightly. You don't know who I am. Should I? Most people do. It's refreshing that you don't. They pulled up to Skyline Tower, and Jack understood why she'd seemed so small sitting on the street corner. The building was a monument to wealth and power, all glass and steel, an implied exclusivity. A doorman in a uniform that probably cost more than Jack's entire wardrobe emerged to help her out of the car. Miss Hamilton, the doorman said with practiced deference. Are you all right? Fine, James, just tired. Jack started to pull away, but something made him hesitate. Maybe it was the way she'd thanked the doorman with genuine warmth despite her obvious distress. Maybe it was the poetry comment, or the sadness in her eyes, or the way she'd relaxed when he didn't recognize her name. He parked and followed them into the lobby. The penthouse elevator required a special key card, which Victoria fumbled for in a small clutch purse that matched her dress. Her hands were shaking slightly, whether from alcohol, emotion, or both. Jack couldn't tell. I can get her upstairs safely, sir, James offered, but Victoria waved him off. Jack's got me, don't you? Jack, he did, apparently. The elevator ride to the 62nd floor was silent, except for the soft hum of expensive machinery. When the doors opened, they revealed a living space that belonged in architectural magazines, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Minimalist furniture that probably cost more than Jack's annual salary. Art that looked important and inaccessible, but it felt empty, not just unoccupied, but empty, like a beautiful shell with nothing living inside it. Victoria made it to the enormous sectional sofa before her strength gave out completely. Jack helped her sit and looked around uncertainly. Water, she said, and aspirin. Kitchen's that way. He found both in a kitchen that looked like it had never been used for actual cooking. The refrigerator was mostly empty except for expensive bottled water and what looked like several days' worth of untouched takeout containers. He brought her a glass of water and 2 aspirin, which she accepted gratefully. Thank you, she said. You don't have to stay. But he did stay long enough to make sure she was settled, long enough to find a throw blanket to cover her with, long enough to write his name and number on the back of one of his business cards and leave it on the coffee table next to the water glass. Just in case, he said. She was already half asleep when he let himself out, trusting that James would ensure the door locked behind him. The elevator ride down felt like returning to reality from a strange dream. Back in his car, Jack sat for a moment in the shadow of Skyline Tower and thought about the contrast between Victoria's penthouse and his studio apartment. 2 people, 2 worlds, one brief intersection on a Tuesday night when loneliness had trumped common sense. His phone buzzed with another ride request, a college student heading home from the library. Back to the real world of ordinary people with ordinary problems. But as he drove away, Jack found himself thinking about the diamond earring he'd noticed on his passenger seat. Delicate and expensive. Probably worth more than he made in a month. She must have lost it during the ride. A small piece of her world left behind in his. He'd return it tomorrow. He decided it was the right thing to do. The card with his number lay on Victoria Hamilton's coffee table, like a bridge between worlds, waiting for someone brave enough to cross it. Neither of them could have known that by morning. That small piece of cardboard would become the foundation for something that would change both their lives forever. Some nights, after all, really do change everything. Victoria awoke to sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows and a headache that felt like divine punishment. The throw blanket that covered her was soft and unfamiliar cashmere. Probably, though she couldn't remember buying it. Her evening gown from the charity auction was wrinkled beyond salvation, and her mouth tasted like regret in expensive wine. The events of the previous night came back in fragments: the disastrous board meeting, too many glasses of champagne at the investor dinner, the walk that had somehow turned into sitting on a street corner in despair, and then a kind voice, gentle hands helping her to safety, water and aspirin left within reach like small mercies. The business card on her coffee table was simple white cardstock with basic black lettering. Jack Reynolds, professional driver. A phone number, nothing more. But something about its simplicity, its complete lack of pretension, made her chest tight with emotions she couldn't name. She picked up the card with trembling fingers, studying the slightly smudged ink as if it might reveal secrets about the man who had helped her without asking for anything in return. In her world, every kindness came with a price tag. Every gesture had an agenda. But Jack Reynolds had simply done what was right and disappeared back into the night. The penthouse felt more oppressive than usual that morning, 60 floors above the city, surrounded by the finest things money could buy. Victoria had never felt more isolated. She padded barefoot to the kitchen, noting the empty takeout containers in the refrigerator, the pristine surfaces that spoke of a life too busy for simple pleasures like cooking breakfast. Her phone buzzed insistently from her purse, 17 missed calls from her assistant, 12 from board members, 43 unread messages that probably ranged from concerned to furious. The European merger deadline loomed like a guillotine, and yesterday's meeting had made one thing crystal clear: the investors wanted stability, tradition, family values. They wanted a married CEO, not a 34-year-old woman who collected honorary degrees instead of husbands. But for once, the corporate crisis felt secondary to a more pressing question. What kind of person helps a stranger without expecting anything in return? Victoria spent the morning in meetings she attended via video call, her camera positioned to hide the fact that she was still wearing yesterday's dress. The conversation swirled around quarterly projections and market positioning, but her mind kept drifting to a business card and the memory of genuine concern in a stranger's voice. "Miss Hamilton," her assistant's voice cut through her distraction. "The Moretti Group is requesting a follow-up call about the merger timeline." "Schedule it for tomorrow," Victoria said absently, then caught herself. "Actually, cancel my afternoon appointments. I have something I need to take care of." By 3:00, she was sitting in her Porsche outside Harbor Bay Academy, feeling more nervous than she had during yesterday's board meeting. The private investigator had been efficient, perhaps too efficient. Within 2 hours, she'd had Jack Reynolds' full background: widowed father, night shift driver, son enrolled in the school's accelerated program, no criminal record, no outstanding debts beyond the normal struggles of single parenthood, no red flags beyond the admirable stubbornness of a man determined to give his child every opportunity. The guilt of invading his privacy warred with a curiosity she couldn't suppress. What did it look like, she wondered, to live a life where the biggest concerns were school tuition and car repairs? Instead of hostile takeovers and family legacy clauses, she didn't have long to wait. At 3:15, Jack emerged from the school building with a boy who could only be Lucas. The same dark eyes, the same easy smile, the careful way they walked together that spoke of a deep bond forged by circumstance and choice. The boy was chattering excitedly about something, gesturing with the enthusiasm of childhood, and Jack listened with a kind of focused attention that seemed increasingly rare in her world. Watching them together, Victoria felt something crack open in her chest. This was what family looked like when it wasn't a corporate strategy or a publicity opportunity. This was love in its simplest, purest form, a father who worked double shifts to afford his son's education. A child who clearly adored the man who'd chosen to put him first in every decision. They walked past her car without noticing her, heading toward a small restaurant with hand-painted signs in both English and what looked like Chinese characters. Through the window, she watched them settle into a booth. Lucas spreading homework across the table while Jack helped him with what appeared to be math problems. The scene was so domestic, so quietly beautiful, that Victoria felt like an intruder just observing it. The coffee-stained napkin with Jack's address felt like evidence of her stalking when she pulled it from her purse. The investigator had been thorough: address, work schedule, even the detail about Mrs. Chen next door, who watched Lucas during Jack's evening shifts, information that felt invasive now that she'd seen them together. Seen the careful world they'd built from love and determination. Victoria started her car and drove away before they finished dinner, guilt churning in her stomach. What was she doing? Following a man who'd shown her simple human kindness, invading his privacy, watching his child in her world. This kind of behavior was called due diligence in the real world. It was called stalking. But she couldn't stop thinking about the way Jack had covered her with a blanket, the way he'd left water and aspirin within reach, the way he'd simply helped without asking questions or expecting explanations. In 34 years, how many people had shown her that kind of uncomplicated kindness? She could count them on one hand. Back in her penthouse that evening, Victoria stood at her wall of windows, looking down at the city lights and thinking about the conversation she'd overheard through the restaurant window. Something about a science project, materials they needed to buy, careful calculations about what they could afford. Lucas's excited chatter about orbital mechanics and his dreams of becoming an astronaut. The business card sat on her coffee table like an accusation. She'd kept it there all day, unable to throw it away, but equally unable to use it. What would she say? Thank you for helping me. And by the way, I've been researching your entire life. The truth was impossible, but lies felt worse. Her phone rang her assistant, with another crisis that needed immediate attention, another fire that required her to choose between competing priorities. Victoria answered automatically. Slipping back into the role that had defined her for so long, she'd forgotten there might be alternatives. But as she talked through acquisition strategies and risk assessments, part of her mind remained fixed on a simple question that had no corporate-approved answer. What would it feel like to live a life where kindness was more important than profit? Where family was defined by love rather than stock options? Where helping a stranger didn't require a cost-benefit analysis? The napkin with Jack's address crinkled softly in her free hand. Tomorrow, she promised herself. Tomorrow she would find the courage to cross the distance between their worlds and discover what happened when genuine gratitude met unexpected kindness. The city glittered below her penthouse windows. Millions of lights representing millions of lives she'd never touched, stories she'd never heard, connections she'd never made. But somewhere in that vast constellation of humanity, a father was tucking his son into bed and maybe, just maybe, thinking about the strange woman he'd helped on a Tuesday night. Some bridges, Victoria was learning, required more courage to cross than others. The guilt lasted exactly 18 hours. By Thursday evening, curiosity had evolved into something more dangerous, a genuine desire to understand how people lived when their decisions weren't filtered through corporate lawyers and public relations specialists. Victoria found herself parked across from Chen's family restaurant again, watching through windows fogged with the steam of home cooking as Jack and Lucas shared what appeared to be their regular Thursday night dinner. The restaurant was exactly the kind of place she'd never noticed before family-owned, with mismatched chairs and photographs of satisfied customers covering every available wall space. The kind of establishment that survived on loyalty rather than marketing budgets, where the menu was written in 2 languages and the staff treated regulars like extended family. Through the window, she could see Lucas working on homework while Jack helped. When he wasn't distracted by his own meal, there was an ease to their interaction that spoke of countless similar evenings. A routine built around the simple pleasure of being together after a long day. When Lucas laughed at something his father said, the sound was audible even through the glass pure. Unguarded joy that seemed to light up the entire restaurant. An older woman, she had to be Mrs. Chen, based on the way she fussed over Lucas like a grandmother, brought them tea without being asked, and ruffled the boy's hair with casual affection. The gesture was so naturally maternal that Victoria felt a sharp pang of recognition. This was what family looked like when it wasn't performance art. She was so absorbed in observing their dinner that she almost missed their departure. Jack and Lucas emerged from the restaurant with takeout containers, probably tomorrow's lunch. Based on the careful way Jack tucked them into a worn messenger bag and began walking toward what Victoria now knew was their apartment building. 6 blocks away, following them felt like crossing a line she couldn't uncross. But the alternative was returning to her penthouse and spending another evening calculating the probability of corporate survival against the cost of personal happiness. The mathematics of her own life had become as oppressive as the glass walls that surrounded her. She parked 2 blocks from their building and walked, telling herself she was simply taking an evening stroll in a neighborhood she'd never bothered to explore. The area was quieter than downtown, with tree-lined streets and small businesses that had probably served the same families for generations. A community garden occupied the corner lot where developers would have built another tower, and the sound of children playing echoed from a nearby playground. Even though the sun was setting, this was what gentrification looked like in its early stages, the careful balance between preservation and progress, where longtime residents coexisted with newcomers who discovered that affordable didn't necessarily mean undesirable. Victoria recognized the pattern from a dozen neighborhoods her company had improved over the years, though she'd never thought to consider what was lost in the process. She was studying the community garden's hand-painted sign when she heard Lucas's voice. "Dad, look, someone grew sunflowers taller than you." They were 30 feet away, Lucas pointing excitedly at a section of the garden where late summer flowers stretched toward the darkening sky. Jack followed his son's gaze with the patient interest of a parent who'd learned that sharing a child's wonder was one of life's most reliable pleasures. "Those are impressive," Jack agreed. "Think we could grow something like that on our fire escape? Could we really? We have to research what grows well in containers. But I don't see why not. Might be a good winter project." Victoria found herself smiling at their conversation, the easy way they turned a casual observation into future plans. But her amusement faded when Lucas's attention shifted in her direction. "Dad, there's a lady watching us." Jack's head turned, and for a moment, their eyes met across the space between her world and his. Recognition dawned slowly, followed by something that might have been concern or confusion. He said something quiet to Lucas, then approached her with the careful confidence of a man who'd learned to assess situations quickly. "Victoria." His voice carried a mix of surprise and wariness. "Are you all right?" The question was so genuine, so completely focused on her well-being, rather than the strangeness of encountering her on his neighborhood street, that Victoria felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. When was the last time someone had asked if she was all right and actually waited for an answer? She struggled for words that wouldn't sound like the corporate speak that had become her default language. "I wanted to thank you for Tuesday night, and to return this." She held out the diamond earring, which she'd kept in her purse like a talisman. Jack looked at it with the same expression he might have worn if she'd handed him a live grenade. "That's not mine," he said carefully. "I know. I lost it in your car." She stopped, realizing how her words might sound. "It's not particularly important, just expensive." "Charmant." Lucas had approached during their exchange, curiosity overcoming whatever warnings his father might have given him about talking to strangers. Up close, he was even more clearly Lisa's son, the same intelligent eyes, the same easy smile that suggested he'd inherited his mother's gift for finding joy in simple things. "Are you the fancy lady?" he asked with the directness that was childhood's greatest social weapon. "Lucas," Jack said quietly. But Victoria laughed despite herself. I suppose I am, though I'm not feeling particularly fancy at the moment. Dad helped you because you were sad. He always helps people when they're sad. It's like his superpower. The comment hit Victoria with unexpected force. In her world, helping others was a strategic decision, a calculated risk assessed against potential benefits. But Lucas spoke about his father's kindness as if it were simply an essential characteristic, like height or eye color. That's a good superpower to have, Victoria said softly. The best. Lucas agreed with 8-year-old certainty. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, three people from different worlds brought together by chance and kindness. Then Jack cleared his throat. We should probably get home. School night. Of course. Victoria stepped back, recognizing dismissal when she heard it. Thank you again. For everything. She was turning to leave when Lucas spoke up. You could come see our fire escape garden when we plant it. If you want. Lucas, Jack began. But his son continued with the fearless optimism of childhood. Dad says gardens grow better when more people care about them, and you seem like you might need something to care about. Out of the mouths of babes, Victoria felt something fundamental shift in her chest, as if Lucas's innocent observation had unlocked a door she hadn't even realized was closed. I'd like that, she said, and meant it more than she'd meant anything in years. The takeout menu from Chen's family restaurant that she'd picked up from their table the night before crinkled softly in her purse as she walked back to her car. Tomorrow, she promised herself. She would find the courage to use it not as corporate research or calculated strategy, but as the first step toward understanding what it meant to live a life measured in moments rather than profit margins. Some gardens, she was beginning to understand, required more than money to grow. Friday afternoon found Victoria doing something she hadn't done in 15 years, browsing the children's section of the downtown library. She felt conspicuous among the families with young children. Overdressed in her tailored suit and heels that clicked too loudly on the worn linoleum floors. But Lucas's comment about orbital mechanics had stuck with her, and if she was going to accidentally encounter them again, she wanted to be prepared. The astronomy section was smaller than she'd expected, but filled with books that bore the gentle wear of many small hands. She selected a hardcover volume about black holes and space exploration, noting the way the binding cracked familiarly when she opened it. This was what libraries were supposed to be, repositories of knowledge accessible to anyone curious enough to seek it. Not the sterile corporate research centers she was accustomed to. Finding everything you need. Victoria looked up to find a librarian watching her, with the kind of helpful interest that suggested she'd been standing there for several minutes without moving. The woman was probably in her 60s, with silver hair and eyes that held the particular warmth of people who dedicated their lives to helping others learn. I'm looking for something about space for an 8-year-old, Victoria said. Something that would excite a boy who talks about orbital mechanics like other kids talk about video games. The librarian's face lit up. Oh, you must be talking about Lucas Reynolds. That child is going to be an astronaut someday. Mark my words. Always checking out books about planets and rockets. His father brings him here every Saturday morning. Victoria's heart did something complicated in her chest. You know them. Know them, honey. I've been watching that boy grow up for 3 years, ever since his mama passed and his daddy started bringing him here for their weekly adventures. Jack's a good man, works himself to the bone to make sure Lucas has every opportunity. That child is his whole world. The casual way the librarian shared this information, as if Victoria were simply another concerned community member, made her throat tight. This was what it looked like when people genuinely cared about each other's well-being. When a child's love of learning was celebrated by strangers who had made it their business to nurture young minds. Saturday mornings, Victoria repeated softly. Like clockwork, usually here by 10, gone by noon. Lucas picks out books about space. Jack finds something about parenting or home repair. Sweet tradition. The librarian selected a book from the shelf and handed it to Victoria. This one's new, just came in last week. Beautiful photographs of the nebulae. Victoria accepted the book with hands that trembled slightly. The cover showed swirling colors against the deep black of space, cosmic clouds that looked like celestial art. It was exactly the kind of thing that would make Lucas's eyes light up with wonder. "Thank you," she managed. "You're welcome, dear. Always nice to see adults taking an interest in fostering a child's curiosity. The world needs more of that." Victoria purchased the book at the checkout desk, declining the librarian's offer to include it in the library's collection instead. Some gifts, she was learning, meant more when they came from the heart rather than institutional generosity. Saturday morning found her back at the library, sitting in the reading area with a magazine she wasn't actually reading, and the astronomy book tucked discreetly in her purse. At 9:58 a.m., she heard Lucas's voice echoing from the children's section, excitement bubbling over as he told his father about a documentary he'd watched about Mars rovers. "Did you know they can analyze soil samples from 47 million miles away? The engineering alone is incredible. Dad, how do they account for signal delay in the programming?" Jack's response was patient, encouraging, the voice of a parent who'd learned that curiosity was precious and should never be dismissed. "That's a great question. Buddy, maybe we can find a book that explains the technical details." This was Victoria's cue. She stood, took a deep breath, and walked toward the children's section as if she'd just arrived and was simply browsing. The performance felt awkward and obvious to her, but Lucas spotted her first, and his face brightened with recognition. "Hey, you're the fancy lady from the garden." "Victoria," she corrected gently, kneeling to his level. "And you're Lucas, the future astronaut." Jack appeared from behind a bookshelf, carrying an armload of picture books about rockets and planets. His expression was carefully neutral, but Victoria caught the slight tension around his eyes that suggested he was still trying to figure out why she kept appearing in their lives. "Small world," he said carefully. "Small city," Victoria corrected. "I was actually hoping I might run into you. I found something I thought Lucas might enjoy." She pulled the astronomy book from her purse and watched Lucas's eyes go wide. The boy reached for it with the reverence other children might reserve for a new toy, his fingers tracing the cosmic swirls on the cover. "Nebulae," he breathed. "Dad, look at this. These are stellar nurseries, places where new stars are born." Jack's expression softened as he watched his son's reaction, whatever reservations he had about Victoria's motives. They clearly took second place to Lucas's happiness. "What do you say to Miss Victoria?" "Thank you," Lucas said, but he was already opening the book, lost in photographs of distant galaxies. "Oh, wow! Look at this one! The Horsehead Nebula. It's like a cosmic sculpture." Victoria found herself genuinely smiling for the first time in weeks. This was what generosity was supposed to feel like, not the calculated philanthropy of tax-deductible donations, but the simple joy of giving someone something they would treasure. "You're welcome," she said. "Though I have to admit, I had help picking it out. The librarian said you were serious about astronomy." "The most serious," Lucas confirmed. "I'm going to design spacecraft that can travel to other galaxies, not just our solar system, real interstellar exploration." "That's ambitious," Dad says. "If you're going to dream, you might as well dream big." Victoria glanced at Jack, who was watching their interaction with something that might have been cautious approval. "That's excellent advice." They spent the next hour in the library together, Lucas showing Victoria his favorite books while Jack maintained a polite but watchful distance. She learned that Lucas's knowledge of space extended far beyond what most adults understood, that he could explain the mechanics of orbital decay and the challenges of long-distance space travel with the enthusiasm of a natural teacher. More importantly, she learned what it felt like to have someone share their passion without expecting anything in return. Lucas's excitement was contagious, his genuine love of learning a reminder that curiosity was its own reward. When they finally left the library, Lucas clutching his new book and chattering about neutron stars. Victoria felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the satisfaction of time well spent on something that mattered more than profit margins. "Thank you," Jack said quietly as they reached the sidewalk. "For the book. He'll treasure it." "It was my pleasure, really." They stood there for a moment, three people who probably shouldn't have found common ground but somehow had. Then Lucas tugged on his father's sleeve. Dad, could we show Victoria the bookstore, the one with the science section in the basement? Jack hesitated, and Victoria could see him weighing unknown factors in the careful way of single parents who'd learned that every decision affected their child's well-being. I don't want to intrude, Victoria said quickly. But if you're going anyway, we always go to McKinley's books after the library, Lucas said, as if this settled the matter. It's like our Saturday tradition. McKinley's books. The name felt like a sign, though Victoria wasn't sure what it meant. But when Jack nodded slowly, she felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't even realized was tight. Well, Jack said, I guess you're coming to McKinley's books. The worn astronomy book tucked under Lucas's arm seemed to pulse with possibility as they walked together toward whatever came next. Some gifts. Victoria was learning, opened doors to worlds she'd never imagined wanting to enter. McKinley's books turned out to be exactly the kind of place Victoria hadn't known. Still existed 3 stories of overstuffed shelves, creaking wooden floors, and the particular smell of old paper and possibility that belonged to independent bookstores. The owner, a man in his 70s with wild white hair and paint-stained fingers, greeted Lucas like a favorite grandchild. My young astronomer come to check on the space section again. Hi, Mr. McKinley. This is Victoria. She bought me a book about nebulae. Mr. McKinley's keen eyes assessed Victoria with the practiced judgment of someone who'd spent decades matching books to readers. Nebulae. Ah, excellent choice. The boy's got sophisticated taste. Most kids his age are still stuck on rocket ships and alien stories. Lucas beamed at the compliment, then tugged on Victoria's sleeve. Come on, I want to show you the basement. They have first editions down there. The basement was a wonderland of scientific texts, philosophy books, and rare volumes that probably belonged in museums. Lucas navigated the narrow aisles with practiced ease, stopping at a section devoted entirely to astronomy and space exploration. This is where I found my book about black holes, he said, running his finger along a row of worn spines. And this one about the search for extraterrestrial life. Dad bought it for me last Christmas, even though it was really expensive. Victoria glanced at the price stickers and winced. The books Lucas gravitated toward were graduate-level texts that cost more than many families spent on groceries in a week. But Jack had bought them anyway. Recognizing that his son's hunger for knowledge was worth any sacrifice, Your father must love you very much, she said softly. The most in the universe. That's what he always says. Lucas pulled a thick volume from the shelf and opened it to a page of complex equations. See this? It's about calculating orbital trajectories. I don't understand all the math yet, but Dad says if I keep studying, I will someday. Jack appeared at the bottom of the stairs, carrying 2 cups of coffee and looking slightly bemused by their rapid departure from the main floor. Finding everything you need down here. Victoria's looking at my favorite books, Lucas announced. I was showing her the orbital mechanics chapter. Of course you were. Jack handed one of the coffee cups to Victoria, a gesture so naturally considerate that it took her a moment to realize he'd anticipated her needs without being asked. Fair warning once Lucas starts talking about orbital mechanics. It's hard to get him to stop. I don't mind, Victoria said, accepting the coffee gratefully. It's refreshing to meet someone so passionate about their interests. They spent another hour in the basement, Lucas explaining various concepts with the enthusiasm of a natural teacher, while Jack and Victoria listened with the shared appreciation of adults watching a child discover the world. When Lucas finally exhausted his repertoire of space facts, they climbed back to the main floor, where Mr. McKinley was ringing up customers with the unhurried efficiency of someone who viewed bookselling as a calling rather than a business. Find what you were looking for, he asked Lucas. Not looking, just showing Victoria the orbital mechanics book. Ah, a woman of discerning taste. Mr. McKinley winked at Victoria. Most people think astronomy is just pretty pictures of planets. Takes a special mind to appreciate the mathematics of celestial motion. Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks. I'm still learning. We all are. Dear, that's the beauty of it. Outside the bookstore, they paused on the sidewalk, as if none of them quite wanted to end their unexpected morning together. Lucas clutched his new astronomy book with one hand and tugged on his father's sleeve with the other. Dad, could we show Victoria the park? The one with the good bench for looking at clouds? Jack checked his watch, and Victoria could see him calculating time against responsibilities. It was only noon, but she suspected his Saturdays were as carefully scheduled as his weekdays' time, with Lucas balanced against household chores, errands, and the thousand small tasks that single parenthood demanded. If Victoria doesn't mind, he said carefully. I'd love to see the park, Victoria said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. Pinewood Park was a small green space carved out between apartment buildings, with mature trees that provided shade and playground equipment that had seen better days but was obviously well loved. Lucas led them to a bench that offered a clear view of the sky, then settled between them with his astronomy book open on his lap. This is where we come to watch for airplanes, he explained to Victoria. Dad taught me how to tell the difference between commercial jets and private planes by their flight patterns. That sounds complicated. Not really. Commercial flights follow specific corridors and altitudes. Private planes have more flexibility in their routes. Lucas pointed to a distant speck moving across the sky. See that one too small to be commercial? And it's flying too low for the normal approach pattern to the airport. Victoria watched the plane with new appreciation, seeing it through Lucas's eyes as a mathematical problem solved by engineering and physics rather than simply another intrusion on the silence. This was what it meant to see the world through the lens of genuine curiosity. Every phenomenon became a puzzle worth solving. Every observation a chance to learn something new. You're going to make an excellent scientist, she told Lucas. That's what Mom used to say. The words came out matter-of-factly, without the careful sadness that usually accompanied references to loss. She said the best scientists are the ones who never stopped asking questions. Jack's face softened at the mention of Lisa, and Victoria caught a glimpse of the grief he carried so carefully that it rarely showed. 3 years wasn't long enough to stop missing someone, especially when that someone lived on in their child's curiosity and dreams. She sounds like she was a wise woman, Victoria said. The wisest, Jack confirmed. She would have loved watching Lucas discover the world like this. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching clouds drift across the autumn sky while Lucas identified different aircraft and explained their probable destinations. The afternoon had a dreamlike quality that made Victoria forget about merger deadlines and corporate obligations. Here, time moved at the pace of conversation and shared wonder rather than calendar notifications and profit projections. When Lucas spotted a small photo booth near the playground, his excitement was immediate and infectious. Dad, can we take pictures Victoria could be in them too? Jack looked uncertain, but Victoria found herself nodding before he could object. That sounds like fun. The photo booth was older than Lucas, with a curtain that didn't quite close and a bench that required creative positioning to fit 3 people. But as the camera counted down from 5, something magical happened. Lucas made bunny ears behind his father's head. Jack crossed his eyes dramatically, and Victoria found herself laughing so hard she forgot to pose. The strip of 4 photos that emerged showed 3 people in various stages of silliness. Lucas grinning proudly, Jack looking years younger than his worry lines suggested, and Victoria with an expression of pure joy she hadn't seen on her own face in longer than she could remember. Can I keep these? Lucas asked, clutching the photo strip. Of course, Victoria said, but maybe we could make copies sometime. I'd like to have one too. As they walked back toward their respective cars, the photo strip tucked safely in Lucas's pocket seemed to represent something important, proof that joy could be spontaneous. That connection could happen between the most unlikely people. That sometimes the best moments were the ones you never planned. Thank you, Jack said as they reached the street corner where they would part ways. For today, Lucas has been happier these past few hours than I've seen him in a long time. Thank you for letting me share it, Victoria replied. I can't remember the last time I spent a day just, enjoying myself. The photo booth strip crinkled softly in Lucas's pocket as they said their goodbyes. 4 pictures that captured the moment when three separate lives began weaving themselves into something that might, with time and courage, become a family. Monday morning shattered Victoria's newfound peace like a hammer through glass. She walked into the boardroom of Hamilton Worldwide to find 12 faces arranged around the mahogany table like a tribunal, each expression carefully neutral in the way that preceded corporate executions. Victoria, her father's former business partner, Raymond Stone, didn't bother with pleasantries. At 73, he'd lost patience with social niceties decades ago. We need to discuss the European merger. The merger contract lay open on the table before her 847 pages of legal language that would either secure her company's future or sign its death warrant. Victoria had spent the weekend thinking about astronomy books and photo booths, but the reality of her situation crashed back with crushing force. The Moretti Group has made their position clear, Stone continued, his voice carrying the particular satisfaction of a man delivering bad news he'd predicted. They will not proceed with an unmarried CEO. Their exact words were, "Family stability reflects corporate stability." Victoria forced herself to sit calmly, though her hands trembled as she opened the folder containing the merger documents. "That's illegal discrimination." "Not in their jurisdiction," said Patricia Warner, the company's lead counsel. "European corporate culture operates under different standards regarding executive leadership. The Moretti Group is within their rights to consider personal stability as a factor in long-term partnerships." Personal stability. Victoria tasted the bitter irony of the phrase. She'd spent 15 years building this company, turning her father's modest hotel chain into a global hospitality empire. But apparently none of it mattered without a husband to legitimize her success in the eyes of old European money. "The deadline stands," Stone said with finality. "They need confirmation of your marital status within 7 days, or they're withdrawing their offer." 7 days. Victoria stared at the contract until the words blurred together, thinking about the impossible mathematics of her situation. Without the European merger, Hamilton Worldwide would remain vulnerable to the hostile takeover that Stone's faction had been orchestrating for months. With it, she'd retain control of her father's legacy and secure the jobs of 800 employees who depended on her leadership. "There must be alternatives," she said finally. "None that don't involve substantial financial losses and the probable dissolution of the company within 18 months. Stone's tone suggested he'd run the numbers multiple times and found them wanting. "Unless you have a candidate in mind." The meeting dragged on for another hour, each option explored and discarded with the systematic thoroughness of corporate strategists who understood that sentiment was a luxury they couldn't afford. By the time the board members filed out, Victoria felt like she'd been hollowed out and refilled with cold calculation. She sat alone in the boardroom afterward, staring at the merger contract that represented everything she'd worked for and everything she was about to lose. 7 days to find a husband or watch her father's legacy crumble under the weight of institutional sexism disguised as business prudence. The photo strip from Saturday was in her purse, 4 pictures of spontaneous joy that now seemed to belong to someone else's life. She pulled it out and studied the images, Lucas's delighted grin, Jack's unguarded laughter, her own face transformed by genuine happiness. In the space of a weekend, she'd discovered what it felt like to live without constant calculation, to make decisions based on joy rather than profit projections. Now that brief freedom felt like a cruel joke. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sandra, her assistant, Moretti Group, requesting conference call to discuss timeline. "Should I schedule?" Victoria stared at the message until the screen went dark, then gathered the merger documents and walked to her office. The view from the 42nd floor showed the city spread out below like a circuit board. Millions of lights representing millions of lives she'd never touch. Somewhere in that vast constellation, Jack was probably picking Lucas up from school, helping with homework, making dinner plans that didn't require a board of directors' approval. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent the weekend learning what it meant to be part of a family, only to discover that she needed a family to save the company that had consumed her entire adult life. By Thursday, the pressure had become unbearable. 3 more board meetings, 2 conference calls with European lawyers, and countless strategy sessions had failed to produce any alternative to the marriage requirement. Victoria found herself thinking about Jack's kindness, Lucas's unguarded enthusiasm, the way they'd included her in their world without expecting anything in return, which made what she was about to do even more unconscionable. She drove to Pinewood after dark, her Porsche looking conspicuously expensive among the modest cars parked on the residential street. The apartment building was exactly as she'd imagined: solid, working class, the kind of place where people made do with what they had and found ways to be happy anyway. Mrs. Chen answered her knock with the wariness of someone who'd learned to be cautious about strangers at the door. But when Victoria explained who she was, the elderly woman's face brightened with recognition. "Oh, you're the lady from the library. Lucas hasn't stopped talking about you all week." The guilt hit Victoria like a physical blow. Lucas had been talking about her, probably with the innocent excitement of a child who'd found a new friend. And here she was about to use that trust for her own desperate purposes. "Is Jack home?" "Just got back from his shift. Let me get him." Jack appeared in the doorway looking tired, but pleased to see her. He was still wearing his Uber company polo shirt, and there were lines around his eyes that spoke of long nights and constant worry. When he smiled, though, years seemed to fall away. "Victoria, this is a surprise." "I need to talk to you," she said. "It's important." He invited her in, apologizing for the apartment's modest size, as if she were a guest rather than an intruder. Lucas emerged from the bedroom in pajamas covered with rocket ships, his face lighting up when he saw her. "Victoria, did you come to see my science project? I used some of the pictures from the book you gave me." The project was impressive, a scale model of the solar system with handwritten cards explaining orbital mechanics and gravitational relationships. Lucas had clearly spent hours on it, and the pride in his work was evident in every carefully positioned planet. "It's beautiful," Victoria said, and meant it. "Your teacher is going to be very impressed." "Dad helped with the math, but I did all the research myself." Jack ruffled his son's hair with casual affection. "Bedtime, spaceman, school tomorrow. Can Victoria read me a story, please?" The request was so innocent, so trusting, that Victoria felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "I'd love to." The bedtime story was from one of Lucas's astronomy books, a simplified explanation of how stars were born and died in the cosmic recycling that made new worlds possible. Lucas listened with rapt attention, asking questions that demonstrated his sophisticated understanding of concepts that would challenge most adults. "When I'm an astronaut," he said as Victoria closed the book, "I'm going to name a star after you, and one after Dad, and one after Mom, so she can watch over us from space." Victoria's throat tightened. "That's a beautiful idea. You'll still be our friend then, right? Even when I'm in space." "Always," Victoria promised, hoping it wasn't a lie. After Lucas was asleep, Jack made coffee, and they sat at his small kitchen table while Victoria struggled to find words for what she needed to say. The merger contract was in her purse, along with the photo strip that represented everything she was about to destroy. "I need your help," she said finally, "and I hate myself for asking." Jack's expression grew serious. "What kind of help?" She told him everything: the merger deadline, the marriage requirement, the choice between saving her company and destroying the lives of 800 employees. She explained about her father's will, about Stone's hostile takeover attempts, about the impossible situation that had reduced her to begging a stranger to solve her corporate problems. Jack listened without interrupting, his face growing more concerned as the scope of her desperation became clear. When she finished, he sat in silence for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what she was asking. "You want me to marry you," he said finally. "I want to hire you to marry me. $50,000 for a week-long performance that would save my company and give Lucas every educational opportunity he deserves." The words hung between them like a bridge. Neither of them was sure they could cross. Victoria watched Jack's face, seeing the exact moment when understanding shifted to something that might have been hurt or disappointment. "You researched me." He sighed quietly. "You know about Lucas's school fees." About the money we don't have? Yes. This whole thing, the library, the bookstore, the photo booth, it was all leading to this. No, the word came out more forcefully than she'd intended. The rest was real. This is just desperation. Jack stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights that represented all the opportunities he couldn't give his son. All the dreams that required more money than a rideshare driver could ever earn. A week, he said. A week. We'd have to convince the European investors that we're genuinely married, which means public appearances, maybe some media coverage. But after the merger's approved, we could quietly divorce. You'd keep the money, and Lucas would have his future secured. And what do you get out of it? I keep my father's company. I save 800 jobs. I prove that a woman can run a business without needing a man's name to legitimize her success. Jack turned back to face her, and in his eyes, she saw the same careful calculation she'd been doing for days, the weight of providing for a child, the mathematics of love measured against financial necessity. I need to think about it, he said. Victoria nodded and gathered her purse, the merger contract crinkling softly as she stood. You have my number. The offer stands until Sunday. At the door, she paused and looked back at the apartment that had briefly felt like home. For what it's worth, the friendship was real. Whatever you decide, that part was real. The contract rustled in her purse as she walked back to her car, 847 pages of legal language that had somehow reduced human connection to a business transaction. 7 days to find a husband. 3 days to convince a good man to sacrifice his integrity for money. Some bridges, Victoria was learning, burned even as you crossed them. Jack didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table with Lisa's wedding ring box open before him, the simple gold band catching reflections from the streetlights outside. She'd worn it for 7 years, through pregnancy and new parenthood, and the 1,000 small joys and sorrows that made up a marriage. Now it sat silent in its velvet nest, a reminder of promises kept in love that death couldn't diminish. What would you do? He whispered to the empty apartment. But Lisa's voice was harder to hear these days. 3 years had blurred the edges of memory, leaving him with impressions rather than conversations. He remembered her laughter, her fierce protectiveness when it came to Lucas, her ability to see possibility where others saw only problems. But he couldn't conjure her voice clearly enough to imagine her answer to this impossible question. $50,000. The number danced through his calculations like a salvation he didn't dare trust. Lucas's school tuition for the next 3 years. A reliable car that wouldn't leave them stranded. A college fund that might actually grow large enough to matter. Medical insurance that wouldn't require choosing between preventive care and grocery money. But at what cost? By morning. He'd made a list of pros and cons that read like an ethical philosophy exercise. On one side, financial security. Lucas's future, the chance to help someone who'd shown them genuine kindness. On the other, the commodification of marriage. The lie they'd have to live. The risk of exposing Lucas to a world where relationships were transactions rather than bonds. Mrs. Chen knocked on his door at 7 a.m. with a thermos of tea and the intuitive understanding of someone who'd been watching over their family long enough to recognize a crisis. You look terrible, she said without preamble, settling into his kitchen chair as if she belonged there, which in many ways she did. Didn't sleep much. Want to talk about it? Jack found himself telling her everything Victoria's proposal. The money, the impossible choice between pride and practicality. Mrs. Chen listened with the patience of someone who'd raised 4 children and buried 2 husbands. Her weathered hands wrapped around her teacup as she absorbed the complexity of his situation. This woman, she said finally. You care about her. Jack hesitated. It's complicated. Love usually is. Mrs. Chen's eyes held the particular wisdom of people who'd learned that simple answers rarely solve complex problems. The question isn't whether you care about her. The question is whether you trust her. Trust. Jack thought about Victoria's vulnerability that first night, her genuine delight in Lucas's enthusiasm, the way she'd laughed in the photo booth without self-consciousness. Against that, he weighed her research into his life, her calculated approach to solving her corporate problems. The fact that she'd waited until desperation forced her hand before revealing her true situation. "I don't know," he admitted. "Then you have your answer." Mrs. Chen sipped her tea. "Marriage, even pretend marriage, requires trust. Without it, you're just two people lying to the world and each other." As Mrs. Chen left and Jack prepared for another day of managing their careful routine, he couldn't shake the memory of Victoria's face when she'd asked for his help, beneath the corporate composure. He'd seen genuine anguish not just at her professional crisis, but at the position she'd been forced into by circumstances beyond her control. Friday brought a phone call that changed everything. "Mr. Reynolds, this is Principal Martinez from Harbor Bay Academy. I'm calling about Lucas's placement in our gifted program." Jack's heart jumped. They'd been waiting for months to hear about Lucas's test results, hoping for admission to the accelerated track that would better serve his son's remarkable intellect. "Lucas qualified," Principal Martinez continued, "but I'm afraid there's been a funding cut. The district can no longer subsidize the program materials and field trips. The additional cost would be $320 per month." $320. In Jack's careful budget, it might as well have been $3,200. He thanked Principal Martinez and hung up, staring at the wall where Lucas's rocket ship drawings were taped in careful rows. His son's future reduced to mathematics he couldn't solve. That evening, Lucas bounded through the door with his usual after-school energy, chattering about a documentary they'd watched in science class. But when Jack told him about the gifted program placement, the boy's excitement shifted to careful consideration. "How much does it cost?" Lucas asked with the practical awareness of a child who'd learned to think about money. "More than we can manage right now." Lucas nodded with understanding that broke Jack's heart. At 8 years old, his son had already learned that wanting something wasn't enough, that dreams required resources they couldn't always provide. "It's okay, Dad. I can learn about space from library books." "You shouldn't have to settle for okay," Jack said, pulling Lucas close. "You deserve every opportunity. I promise you that." The simple statement hit Jack like a physical blow. Lucas's faith in him was absolute, unshakable, built on 3 years of putting his son's needs first in every decision. But what if putting Lucas first meant making a choice that felt like betrayal of everything Jack had tried to teach him about integrity and authentic relationships? Saturday morning brought Victoria to their door. Looking nervous in jeans and a sweater that probably cost more than Jack's monthly rent, but somehow made her seem more approachable. She carried a bag from the local bakery and wore an expression of carefully controlled hope. "I brought breakfast," she said. "I thought we could talk." Lucas emerged from the bedroom in his space-themed pajamas and greeted Victoria with the uncomplicated joy of childhood friendship. Watching them together, Victoria's genuine interest in his solar system project, Lucas's excited explanations of orbital mechanics, Jack felt the last of his resistance crumble. This wasn't just about money, it was about the woman who'd bought his son an astronomy book, who'd spent a Saturday afternoon listening to 8-year-old theories about interstellar travel, who'd laughed so hard in a photo booth that she'd forgotten to pose. After Lucas went to play in his room, Jack and Victoria sat at the kitchen table with coffee growing cold between them. The merger contract lay unopened in her briefcase, a reminder of the corporate world that had brought them to this moment. "I need you to know," Victoria said carefully, "that regardless of what you decide, Lucas's education fund is taken care of. I've already set up a trust that will cover his tuition through graduate school." Jack's head snapped up. "What?" "Whether you agree to help me or not, Lucas deserves every opportunity. I won't use his future as leverage." The gesture was so unexpected, so completely contrary to corporate negotiation tactics, that Jack found himself speechless. Here was proof that her feelings for Lucas, for both of them, went deeper than business necessity. "You can't just, I can, and I have. The money is his, free and clear, no strings attached." Victoria's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her coffee. "I need you to make this decision based on what's right for you, not what's expedient for your bank account." Jack stared at her, trying to reconcile this gesture with his assumptions about wealthy people and their motivations. In his experience, money always came with conditions. Generosity always had a price. But Victoria was offering to secure his son's future while simultaneously removing her strongest bargaining chip. Why? He asked. Because I've spent the last 3 days hating myself for putting you in this position. Because Lucas's dreams shouldn't depend on adult complications. Because, she paused, searching for words. Because some things are more important than getting what you want. They sat in silence while Jack processed this development, without the financial pressure. The decision became purely ethical. Was he willing to help someone he cared about? Even if the help required compromising his principles? There's something else, Victoria said. The Europeans want to meet you before the merger goes through. If we do this, it won't just be a quick courthouse ceremony and a photo opportunity. We'll have to convince seasoned business people that our relationship is genuine. Meaning, they'll ask about how we met, how long we've been together, what our plans are for the future. We'll need to know each other well enough that our story holds up under scrutiny. Jack thought about the implications, a crash course in being married. Essentially, yes, we'd need to spend the week learning to be convincing as a couple. That means time together, shared history, the kind of casual intimacy that develops over months of dating compressed into days of preparation. The challenge was daunting, but something about it appealed to the part of Jack that had always been drawn to complex problems. This wasn't just about playing a role, it was about understanding someone well enough to represent their relationship authentically. And after the merger, we divorced quietly. Irreconcilable differences, no fault on either side. You keep your payment, I keep my company, and we all go back to our separate lives. All of us. Victoria's composure slipped slightly. Lucas would probably hate me for the lie. I've thought about that. It's part of why this is so difficult. Jack studied her face, seeing the genuine conflict there. She wasn't just asking him to deceive European investors. She was asking him to potentially damage his relationship with his son when the truth eventually came out. He doesn't have to know, Jack said slowly. If we're careful about it, kids don't always understand adult complications. You'd really consider it, even with everything it involves. Jack looked around their small apartment, thinking about the gifted program Lucas couldn't attend, the opportunities that required more resources than a rideshare driver could provide. Then he thought about Lisa's wedding ring, sitting in its box like a symbol of everything marriage was supposed to represent. I need conditions, he said finally. Victoria leaned forward, hope flickering in her eyes. Name them. First, nothing inappropriate happens between us. This is a business arrangement, and I won't pretend otherwise. We share space when necessary, but we maintain boundaries. Agreed. Second, if at any point Lucas seems upset or confused by the situation, we stop. His emotional well-being comes before your merger, before my financial gain, before everything else. Of course. Third, when this is over, we figure out how to maintain some kind of friendship, not for the adults, but for Lucas. He's gotten attached to you, and I won't have him lose another important person in his life without explanation. Victoria's eyes brightened with something that might have been relief. I'd like that very much. Jack reached for Lisa's ring box, opening it one last time to look at the simple gold band that had symbolized the happiest years of his life. He thought about his wife's fierce protectiveness, her willingness to do anything for the people she loved, her belief that sometimes the right choice was the hardest choice. Okay, he said, closing the box with gentle finality. Let's save your company. The merger contract crinkled softly as Victoria pulled it from her briefcase, 847 pages of legal language that would transform their lives in ways none of them could fully predict. But as they began planning their week of pretending to be married, Jack found himself thinking less about the contract's requirements and more about the woman sitting across from him, brilliant, vulnerable, trapped by circumstances she couldn't control, but determined to protect the people who depended on her. Maybe, he thought as they discussed wedding rings and backstory details, the line between pretense and reality wasn't as clear as he'd assumed. Maybe Lisa's ring could serve one more purpose before he finally let it rest, not as a symbol of past love, but as a bridge to whatever came next. Some promises, after all, were worth keeping, even when the circumstances changed beyond recognition. And if helping Victoria meant Lucas could reach for the stars without worrying about the cost, then maybe this impossible week would be worth whatever price they had to pay for it. The ring box sat closed on the table between them as they planned their temporary marriage. A quiet reminder that some things love, loyalty, sacrifice transcended the contracts that tried to contain them. Monday morning arrived with the surreal quality of a dream half remembered. Jack stood before the courthouse steps in his brother-in-law's best suit, a simple gold wedding band hastily purchased from a jewelry store that specialized in last-minute decisions heavy on his finger. The weight felt foreign after 3 years of bare hands, a reminder that some symbols carried meaning beyond their material value. Victoria emerged from a black sedan, wearing a cream-colored dress that managed to be both elegant and understated, appropriate for a woman marrying for love rather than headlines. She'd chosen well. The European investors would be watching for signs of ostentation or calculated publicity seeking. This looked like two people who decided to formalize a relationship that had grown naturally over time. "Ready?" she asked, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. "As ready as someone can be for a fake wedding, I suppose." Lucas bounced between them in his newest clothes, a navy blue shirt and khakis that Victoria had insisted on buying despite Jack's protests. The boy radiated excitement, convinced he was witnessing something romantic rather than strategic. Mrs. Chen walked beside them with the dignified bearing of someone who'd agreed to serve as witness while harboring significant reservations about the entire enterprise. "This is like a movie," Lucas said, tugging on Jack's sleeve. "Are you nervous, Dad?" "A little," Jack admitted, which was the understatement of the century. His stomach churned with a mixture of guilt and anticipation that had made breakfast impossible. "Are you excited?" "The most excited." Lucas's eyes widened suddenly. "Does this mean Victoria's going to live with us now?" The question hit both adults like a physical blow. They discussed logistics extensively the week of public appearances, the media strategy, the European investor meeting, but somehow they'd avoided addressing the most basic question of where they'd actually lived during their brief marriage. "We'll figure it out," Victoria said, shooting Jack a look that promised they'd need to solve this problem quickly. Judge Harrison was a woman in her 60s who had probably performed 1,000 weddings and developed the ability to distinguish between unions built on love and those constructed from necessity. She reviewed their paperwork with professional efficiency, noting the speed of their decision without comment. "Do you have rings?" she asked. "We do." Jack produced the simple gold bands they'd selected the night before, his matching the one Lisa had worn, hers a slightly more delicate version that somehow managed to look both expensive and understated. Victoria had wanted to buy something more elaborate, but Jack had insisted on simplicity if they were going to lie about their reasons for marriage. At least the symbols could represent something real. "Jack Reynolds," Judge Harrison began, "do you take Victoria Hamilton to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, until death do you part?" The traditional words carried weight that their arrangement couldn't support. Jack looked into Victoria's eyes, seeing beneath her composed exterior to the vulnerability that had drawn him to help her in the first place. This wasn't the wedding either of them had dreamed of, but it was the one that circumstances had demanded. "I do," he said, and meant it more than he'd expected. "Victoria Hamilton, do you take Jack Reynolds to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, until death do you part?" Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried clearly in the small room. "I do." They exchanged rings with hands that shook slightly, the gold bands sliding into place with the weight of promises neither of them fully understood. When Judge Harrison pronounced them husband and wife, the words seemed to hang in the air like a spell that might transform intention into reality. "You may kiss the bride." The kiss was supposed to be ceremonial, a brief seal on their business arrangement, but when Jack's lips met Victoria's, something unexpected happened. For a moment, the courthouse faded away, leaving only the warmth of connection and the possibility that their pretense might contain more truth than either had anticipated. They broke apart with careful composure, both slightly breathless and trying not to show it. Lucas applauded with 8-year-old enthusiasm, while Mrs. Chen dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, caught between joy and concern for the family she'd helped raise. The marriage certificate felt substantial in Jack's hands, official enough to convince European investors and binding enough to make their situation real in ways that went beyond legal technicalities. They were married now, for better or worse, until divorce or circumstance parted them. Outside the courthouse, photographers waited, not paparazzi, but a single professional hired to document their union for the investors who wanted proof of Victoria's newly stable personal life. The pictures would show a happy couple with a beautiful child, evidence of the family values that corporate Europe apparently required from its business partners. "Smile," the photographer instructed, and they did, Lucas beaming between them as if he'd orchestrated the entire affair. But as they posed for pictures that would convince strangers they were in love, Jack found himself wondering whether the line between performance and reality was as clear as he'd thought. A ring on his finger felt less foreign with each passing moment, and Victoria's hand in his carried a warmth that had nothing to do with strategic necessity. Some marriages, he was beginning to suspect, started with stranger foundations than theirs. The question was whether a week of pretending to be in love might accidentally teach them what love actually felt like. The boardroom at Hamilton Worldwide had been transformed for the occasion. Instead of the usual stark corporate efficiency, someone had arranged fresh flowers and removed the more intimidating charts and projections. The effect was subtle but significant. This was meant to feel like a meeting between families rather than a hostile business negotiation. Victoria sat at the head of the conference table with Jack beside her, their wedding rings catching the afternoon light that streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows. Across from them, the three representatives of the Moretti Group studied them with the practiced assessment of people who'd built fortunes on reading character and motivation. Henry Moretti himself was present, a silver-haired man in his 70s whose family had controlled European hospitality markets for 4 generations. His daughter Marie served as the company's operations director, while his nephew Claude handled legal affairs. Together, they represented old money with older values, the kind of people who believed that personal stability translated directly to corporate reliability. "Congratulations on your recent marriage," Henry said, his English accented but precise. "It must be an exciting time for your family." "Thank you," Victoria replied, reaching for Jack's hand with what appeared to be natural affection. "We're still adjusting to married life, but it feels right. And you, Mr. Reynolds, how are you finding your new role as husband to such a successful businesswoman?" Jack had prepared for this question during their crash course in marital authenticity. "It's impressive watching her work. But at home, she's just Victoria, someone who makes pancakes with my son on Sunday mornings and falls asleep reading annual reports." The detail was specific enough to feel genuine, personal enough to suggest intimate knowledge. Marie Moretti smiled with what seemed like approval. "Your son," she said, consulting her notes. "Lucas, age 8. How is he adjusting to having a stepmother?" "He's wonderful," Victoria said, and her affection was completely authentic. "Brilliant, curious, kind. We bonded over his love of astronomy. He knows more about orbital mechanics than most graduate students." "Children can be challenging in blended families," Claude observed. "How do you handle discipline, financial decisions, the day-to-day complications of step-parenting?" Jack and Victoria exchanged a look that had become natural over their week of intensive preparation. "We're partners in everything," Jack said. "Victoria respects that I'm Lucas's father, but she's also become someone he trusts and turns to. We make decisions together." It wasn't entirely a lie. Over the past 7 days, they'd fallen into domestic routines that felt surprisingly natural. Victoria had indeed made pancakes with Lucas, had helped him with a school project about black holes, had listened to his dreams about space exploration with the genuine interest of someone who cared about his happiness. "The merger timeline is quite ambitious," Henry said, shifting to business matters. You're asking us to commit significant resources to a partnership with someone we've never worked with directly. My father built this company on relationships and trust, Victoria replied. I'm offering the same foundation, with the added stability that comes from having a family invested in long-term success. She gestured to include Jack and, by extension, Lucas in her definition of family. The word carried weight in this context, proof that her priorities extended beyond quarterly profits to encompass the kind of legacy thinking that European old money understood. Mr. Reynolds, Marie said, you must have concerns about your wife's demanding schedule, the international travel, the pressure of running a global company. Jack considered his answer carefully. I knew who I was marrying. Victoria's work is part of who she is, and I support that completely. We've talked about how to balance her responsibilities with our family time, and we're committed to making it work. And if the pressures become too much, corporate leadership can strain even strong marriages, then we'll figure it out together, Jack said simply. That's what marriage means, facing challenges as a team. The answer seemed to resonate with Henry, who nodded slowly. Family businesses require that kind of commitment. It's encouraging to see you understand the broader implications of your wife's role. The meeting continued for another hour, covering financial projections and market strategies. But the personal questions had ended. The Moretti group seemed satisfied that Victoria's marriage represented genuine stability rather than corporate maneuvering. As they prepared to leave, Henry shook both their hands with the gravitas of someone sealing a significant agreement. We look forward to working with Hamilton Worldwide under your leadership. Mrs. Reynolds, your family's support will be invaluable as we build this partnership. Mrs. Reynolds. The name hit Victoria with unexpected force, not because it erased her identity, but because it connected her to something larger than herself. For the first time in her adult life, her worth wasn't measured solely by corporate achievements, but by her ability to build and maintain relationships that mattered. Walking out of the building together, their hands linked from habit rather than performance, Victoria felt something fundamental shift in her understanding of success. The merger was approved, her company was secure, and 800 jobs were safe. But more importantly, she'd discovered what it meant to be part of a family. Even if that family had started as an elaborate pretense, the child's drawing that Lucas had made for them, 3 stick figures holding hands under a smiling sun, was folded in her purse like a talisman. Crayon artwork that represented something more valuable than any contract, the possibility that love could grow from the most unlikely foundations. That family could be chosen as well as inherited. That sometimes the best things happen when you stopped calculating and started trusting. They'd saved her company and secured Lucas's future. But walking home together in the late afternoon light, wedding rings catching the sun and hands intertwined from practice that was becoming preference. Victoria suspected they'd accomplished something even more significant. They'd accidentally become the family they'd been pretending to be. 2 weeks later, the professional family portrait sat on the mantel of their new home, a comfortable house in a neighborhood that split the difference between Jack's modest roots and Victoria's affluent background. In the photograph, 3 people smiled with the easy confidence of a family that had found its rhythm. But the real story lived in the details scattered throughout the house. Lucas's latest science project dominated the dining room table. A working model of a lunar rover that he'd built with components Victoria had sourced from aerospace suppliers. His acceptance letter to the advanced STEM program at the magnet school was framed in the kitchen, alongside his first-place ribbon from the regional science fair and a photograph of the 3 of them at the planetarium's grand reopening, which Hamilton Worldwide had sponsored in honor of their family's commitment to science education. Jack found himself thinking about these details as he prepared dinner, a Tuesday evening ritual that had evolved naturally over the weeks of their unexpected marriage. Victoria would arrive home from the office within the hour, probably carrying takeout containers as backup despite his repeated assurances that he enjoyed cooking. Lucas was in his room, ostensibly doing homework, but more likely reading about exoplanet discovery methods in the astronomy journal Victoria had subscribed for him. The sound of a key in the front door interrupted his reflection. Victoria appeared in the kitchen doorway, still wearing her business suit but somehow looking more relaxed than she had during those first frantic days of their arrangement. Something smells amazing, she said, kissing his cheek with a casual affection that had become second nature. Please tell me you didn't go to too much trouble. Spaghetti and marinara sauce from a jar, hardly gourmet cooking. It's perfect. She loosened her tie and rolled up her sleeves, transforming from corporate executive to family member with practiced ease. How was Lucas's day? He's convinced that one of Jupiter's moons might harbor life, and he's designed an experiment to test soil samples that won't be collected for another 15 years. You know, typical Tuesday, Victoria laughed, the sound warm and unguarded. I'll go see if he wants to tell me about it. Jack watched her head upstairs and marveled at how naturally she'd adapted to step-parenting. The legal adoption paperwork was proceeding slowly through family court. Another unexpected development in a year full of surprises. But the emotional bonds had formed with startling speed. Dad, Lucas's voice carried down from his room. Victoria says you're making spaghetti. Can we eat on the good plates? It's Tuesday, Jack called back. We save the good plates for special occasions. Every day with our family is a special occasion. Victoria's voice, followed by Lucas's delighted agreement. They were right. Jack realized, somewhere between pretending to be married and actually living together. They'd created something that felt effortlessly special, a family built on choice rather than obligation, love rather than convenience. Dinner conversation ranged from Lucas's latest theories about space exploration to Victoria's upcoming business trip to London, where the Moretti Group merger was exceeding all projected outcomes. The easy flow of discussion, the way they automatically divided parenting duties, the comfortable silences that punctuated their meals, all of it felt as natural as if they'd been together for years rather than weeks. After Lucas went to bed, Jack and Victoria settled into their evening routine of shared cleanup and quiet conversation. The kitchen had become their favorite room, partly because it was the most lived-in space in the house, but mostly because it represented everything their relationship had become: functional, nurturing, centered on the daily work of caring for each other. I got a call from Raymond Stone today, Victoria said as she dried dishes. He's retiring from the board. Finally, that's good news, right? The best. It means the last of my father's old guard is moving on, and I can really put my own stamp on the company. She paused, considering her words. It also means the marriage requirement is officially irrelevant. The European partnership is solid, and the board is firmly behind my leadership. Jack's hands stilled on the dish he was washing. They'd avoided this conversation for weeks, both of them aware that the original justification for their marriage had long since disappeared. The divorce papers were drafted and waiting in Victoria's desk drawer, requiring only signatures to dissolve their legal union and return them to their separate lives. So, he said carefully, we could end this anytime. Legally, yes, the contract's fulfilled, the goals are met, and you're free to collect your payment and move on. And practically, Victoria set down the dish towel and turned to face him fully. Practically, I can't imagine my life without you and Lucas in it. These weeks have been the happiest of my adult life, and not because of business success, but because I wake up every morning in a house that feels like home, with people who love me not for what I can provide, but for who I am. Jack reached for her hands, noting how natural the gesture had become. The money is still there if you want it. I never touched the account. I don't want your gratitude. Jack, I want your partnership. I want to help Lucas build his lunar rover and argue about whose turn it is to do laundry and figure out how to balance my travel schedule with his soccer games. You want to stay married to me? I want to be married to you. Really married, not contractually obligated, but emotionally committed. I love you. And I love the family we've built together. The words hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Jack thought about the journey that had brought them here, from a chance encounter on a Tuesday night to a fake wedding, to this moment of absolute honesty in their kitchen. I love you too, he said simply. Both of you, more than I thought possible. They moved toward each other with the inevitability of people who'd found exactly what they'd been searching for without knowing they were looking. The kiss that followed was nothing like their ceremonial courthouse peck. This was the kiss of two people choosing each other freely, completely, permanently. When they broke apart, Victoria was smiling through tears. So we're really doing this, building a life together. We already have, Jack pointed out. Now we're just making it official. From upstairs came the sound of Lucas's voice. Are you guys done being mushy? Because I want to show you my new constellation chart. They laughed. The moment broken and somehow made more perfect by the interruption. This was their life now. Astronomy lessons and board meetings. Family dinners and business trips. The beautiful chaos of three people who'd found their way to each other through kindness, courage, and the willingness to believe that love could grow from the most unlikely beginnings. The family portrait on the mantel caught the last light of evening, three faces reflecting the quiet joy of people who discovered that sometimes the best journeys were the ones you never planned to take. Some stories, after all, were worth the telling, especially the ones that proved that family was something you built rather than something you were born into. And that love was always worth the risk of believing in impossible things. But life, as Victoria was learning, rarely followed the neat arcs of a fairy tale ending. 3 months into their real marriage, she found herself dealing with a complication that hadn't been part of their careful planning. Raymond Stone might have retired from the board, but he hadn't disappeared entirely from their lives. The whispers started at the annual shareholders meeting, subtle at first but gaining momentum, rumors about the true nature of the Hamilton-Reynolds marriage. Questions about the convenient timing, suggestions that the Moretti merger had been secured through deception. Victoria had been prepared for corporate challenges, but she hadn't anticipated that her personal happiness would become her greatest vulnerability. Stone, it seemed, had made it his retirement mission to prove that her marriage had been a strategic business decision rather than a love match. He's been talking to our former doorman, James, Victoria told Jack one evening after Lucas was asleep. Apparently, James remembers the night you brought me home and is willing to testify that we'd never met before. Jack's expression remained calm, but Victoria could see the concern in his eyes. Can he actually cause problems for the merger at this point? Not legally, no. The contracts are signed, but he could damage our reputation with the Morettis. And reputation matters more than legal documents in their world. They sat at the kitchen table, the space that had witnessed both their business arrangement and their genuine commitment. Jack reached for her hand, a gesture that had become second nature. We didn't break any laws, he reminded her. Our marriage might have started as a business agreement, but it's real now. Stone can't take that away from us. Victoria squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his steadiness. I'm not worried about us. I'm worried about Lucas. If this becomes public, he'll find out that our marriage started as a lie. How will he process that? The question hung between them, heavier than any corporate crisis. Lucas had blossomed in their new family structure. His grades had improved. His scientific explorations had grown more sophisticated. And his nightmares about losing his father, something Jack had never mentioned before, had all but disappeared. The thought of disrupting his newfound stability made Victoria physically ill. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, Jack said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. The bridge arrived sooner than either of them expected. 2 days later, Raymond Stone requested a meeting with both of them, his tone leaving no room for refusal. They met him at a discreet restaurant in the financial district, the kind of place where tables were spaced far enough apart to ensure private conversations remained private. Stone looked exactly as Victoria remembered, impeccably dressed, coldly efficient, a man who'd built his career on exploiting others' weaknesses. He barely acknowledged Jack, focusing his attention entirely on Victoria as if to emphasize the power imbalance. I'll be direct, he said after ordering a drink. I know your marriage was arranged to secure the Moretti merger. I have witnesses, documentation, and enough circumstantial evidence to make things very uncomfortable for Hamilton worldwide. Victoria kept her expression neutral, a skill honed through years of corporate warfare. What exactly are you suggesting? Raymond, I'm not suggesting anything. I'm offering you a choice step down as CEO, recommending me as your replacement, or watch your carefully constructed lie unravel in very public, very messy ways. Jack leaned forward, his voice level but edged with steel. Let me understand this. You're threatening to harm an 8-year-old boy's sense of family security if Victoria doesn't hand over her company to you. Stone blinked, as if genuinely surprised by this framing. Business is business, Mr. Reynolds. Collateral damage is unfortunate but unavoidable. Lucas isn't collateral damage, Victoria said, her voice dangerous in its quietness. He's our son. The word hung in the air between them, a declaration more powerful than any legal document. Our son, not her stepson, not his biological child, but their shared responsibility and joy. Stone smiled thinly. Touching, but irrelevant to our discussion. You have 48 hours to consider my offer. After that, I go public with what I know. He left without finishing his drink, leaving Jack and Victoria to confront the reality of their situation. The restaurant continued its quiet hum around them. Other diners oblivious to the emotional bomb that had just been detonated at their table. He can't do this, Jack said finally, his hands clenched on the table. There must be some way to fight back. Victoria was already thinking strategically, years of corporate battles having trained her to assess threats and formulate responses. He's making a fundamental miscalculation. He thinks our marriage was only about the merger, that it was a temporary arrangement we're now stuck with. But it's more than that. Exactly. Victoria's mind raced through possibilities. What if we could prove that? What if we could show the world in stone that our relationship is genuine, regardless of how it started? Jack considered this. How do we do that? We renew our vows, publicly, with all the ceremony we skipped the first time. We invite the Morettis, the board, our employees, everyone. We make it clear that we're choosing each other now, with no business motivations involved. Would that work? Victoria smiled, feeling the first stirrings of hope. Stone is betting that we're ashamed of our beginning, that we're desperate to keep it secret. What if we own it instead? What if we tell our story, our real story that yes, we married quickly, partly for business reasons, but that we found something real and chose to build on it? Jack's expression shifted from concern to determination. The truth, but framed as a love story rather than a business transaction? Exactly, because that's what it is. Isn't it a love story with an unusual beginning? But a love story nonetheless. They spent the next hour planning their counterattack, drawing strength from the partnership that had evolved far beyond their initial agreement. By the time they left the restaurant, Victoria felt lighter, more confident. Stone had underestimated them, treating their marriage as a corporate weakness when it was actually their greatest strength. But the universe, it seemed, had its own plans for testing that strength. The following morning, Victoria was in the middle of a video conference with the Moretti group when her phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. She ignored it, focusing on the discussion of their London property acquisition. But when the same number called 3 more times in succession, a sense of foreboding made her excuse herself from the meeting. Mrs. Reynolds. The voice on the other end was professionally calm. This is Nurse Patel from Harbor Bay Academy. Lucas has had an accident during physical education class. He's conscious and stable, but we think he may have broken his arm. We've been trying to reach your husband, but... I'm on my way, Victoria said, already moving toward the door, calling for her assistant to reschedule the rest of her day. Tell Lucas I'll be there in 15 minutes. The drive to the school was a blur of anxiety and red lights. Victoria had never considered herself a mother. The role had seemed too traditional, too limiting for her ambitions, but in that moment, every cell in her body vibrated with maternal panic. Her son was hurt, and nothing else mattered. She found Lucas in the nurse's office, pale but composed, his left arm carefully supported in a makeshift sling. When he saw her, his eyes widened with surprise, then relief. Victoria, you came. The wonder in his voice pierced her heart. Of course I came. You're hurt. She knelt beside him, careful not to jostle his arm. How did this happen? I was showing Mark how astronauts train for zero gravity, and the climbing apparatus wasn't quite as stable as NASA's equipment, despite his pain. Lucas managed a small smile. I miscalculated the structural integrity. Victoria laughed despite herself, amazed at his ability to turn even an injury into a scientific observation. Well, future astronauts need to know about medical procedures too. We're going to get you to a doctor to check that arm. The nurse approached, clipboard in hand. Mrs. Reynolds, we still haven't been able to reach your husband. He's probably driving. No cell service, Victoria explained, then hesitated. Am I authorized to take Lucas for medical treatment? The question hung awkwardly in the air, despite living as a family for months. Despite the adoption paperwork slowly progressing through the system, Victoria suddenly realized she had no legal right to make medical decisions for Lucas. The nurse checked her records. Mr. Reynolds has you listed as Lucas's emergency contact and authorized guardian. You're cleared to take him for treatment. The simple designation authorized guardian brought unexpected tears to Victoria's eyes. Jack had trusted her with his son's well-being, had formally acknowledged her role in their family, even before their marriage had evolved into genuine love. In the emergency room, while Lucas was being x-rayed, Victoria finally reached Jack, who had indeed been driving in a cellular dead zone. His panic was immediate, but Victoria's calm assurance that Lucas was okay, that she was handling everything, seemed to settle him. I'll meet you at the hospital, he said, the background noise suggesting he was already changing direction. We're fine. Jack, really, it's a simple fracture, and Lucas is already asking if they'll give him a glow-in-the-dark cast so he can study phosphorescence. You're amazing. You know that. The warmth in his voice made her throat tight. Not many CEOs would walk out of a major international meeting for a kid's broken arm. He's not just a kid, Victoria said. He's our son. By the time Jack arrived, Lucas was sporting a neon green cast, not quite phosphorescent, but still cool. Was his verdict in explaining to a fascinated medical student how bone knitting was similar to certain crystallization processes in zero gravity. Jack's relief at seeing his son comfortable and engaged was visible in every line of his body. He wrapped Lucas in a careful hug, then turned to Victoria, pulling her into an embrace that spoke volumes about their shared concern and gratitude. Thank you, he whispered against her hair, for being here, for handling everything. There's nowhere else I would have been, she replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. As they drove home, Lucas dozing in the back seat under the influence of mild painkillers. Jack reached for Victoria's hand. You know what this means, don't you? What, Stone has no power over us? None at all. He can tell the world how our marriage started, but he can't touch what it's become. Victoria considered this, feeling a calm certainty replace her earlier anxiety. You're right. Let him do his worst. We know the truth. The truth was, a family created through unusual circumstances was still a family. Love that grew from pragmatic beginnings was still love, and a woman who had once measured success in profit margins now found her greatest achievement in a child's simple faith that when he was hurt, she would come. Raymond Stone released his exposé 2 days later, a carefully crafted leak to the financial press suggesting that Victoria Hamilton had orchestrated a sham marriage to secure the Moretti Group merger. The story spread quickly through business circles, fueled by the irresistible combination of corporate intrigue and personal scandal. But the reaction wasn't what Stone had anticipated. The Moretti Group, far from being outraged, issued a statement expressing full confidence in their partnership with Hamilton Worldwide. Business begins with strategic relationships, Henry Moretti told the Wall Street Journal, but it prospers through genuine human connection. The Hamilton Reynolds family embodies the values our companies share. The family designation was deliberate, a subtle rebuke to Stone's attempt to reduce their relationship to a business transaction. But the most surprising response came from social media, where the hashtag marrying up began trending not as criticism, but as celebration of a love story that crossed socioeconomic boundaries and challenged traditional narratives about power and success. Women especially seemed captivated by the idea of a female CEO who had found love with a rideshare driver, seeing in their story a model of partnership that valued character over credentials, kindness over cash flow. The fact that Jack had been raising his son alone after his wife's death added an emotional dimension that resonated deeply with the public. By the time Victoria and Jack held their vow renewal ceremony, a simple, elegant event in the botanical garden where Lucas had first shown Victoria the towering sunflower stone scandal had transformed into a romantic legend. The Morettis attended as honored guests, Henry walking Victoria down the aisle in a gesture that symbolically united their business families. Lucas, his green cast now covered with signatures from classmates and decorated with glow-in-the-dark star stickers, carried their rings on a small pillow designed to look like an asteroid. When the minister asked if anyone objected to this union, Lucas solemnly raised his hand. "I just want to say," he announced to the assembled guests, "that Dad and Victoria might have gotten married because of business stuff at first, but they love each other for real now. I know because I've been observing them scientifically, and the data is conclusive." The laughter that rippled through the gathering held no mockery, only affection for the precocious boy who had so clearly found security in his reconstructed family. Victoria's eyes met Jack's over Lucas's head. Sharing a moment of perfect understanding, this was their truth, stated with 8-year-old directness but adult wisdom. "In that case," the minister smiled, "I think we can proceed." Their vows, written together over late-night cups of tea, acknowledged both their unusual beginning and their committed present. "I chose you first from necessity," Victoria said, her voice steady despite the emotion shining in her eyes. "But I choose you now, and will keep choosing you, from the deepest love I've ever known." Jack's response echoed her honesty. "Our beginning was unconventional, but our journey has taught me that love isn't always where or how you expect to find it. Sometimes it's in a business arrangement that becomes a partnership, a pretense that becomes truth, a chance encounter that becomes destiny." When they sealed their renewed commitment with a kiss, the applause that surrounded them felt like affirmation of a fundamental truth: families were created in countless ways, but sustained through choice, commitment, and the daily work of loving one another through all circumstances. The reception that followed was joyful but deliberately intimate. Victoria had insisted on a celebration that reflected their shared values rather than corporate expectations: local food, sustainable decorations, and most importantly, a dance floor where Lucas could showcase his zero-gravity moves despite his cast. Henry Moretti found Victoria during a quiet moment, as she watched Jack twirling a laughing Lucas in careful circles. "You know," the older man said, swirling his champagne thoughtfully, "when we first insisted on the marriage clause, it was because we believed family stability reflected corporate stability." Victoria nodded, waiting for him to continue. "I've come to realize we had it backwards," Henry admitted. "It's not that marriage creates stability, it's that people who can build genuine partnerships in business or in life are inherently trustworthy. You and Jack have shown us that." "Thank you," Victoria said, genuinely touched by his insight. "That means a great deal, coming from you." "My daughter thinks we should remove the marriage requirement from all our future contracts," Henry added with a small smile. "She says it's archaic and potentially discriminatory. I find myself inclined to agree." "Progress comes in unexpected ways," Victoria observed, watching as Marie Moretti joined Jack and Lucas on the dance floor, demonstrating what appeared to be traditional Italian dance steps to a delighted Lucas. "Indeed it does." Henry raised his glass in a small toast. "To unconventional beginnings and authentic partnerships." As the evening wound down, Victoria found herself drawn to the garden's quiet edge, taking a moment to absorb the magnitude of the journey that had brought her here. 3 months ago, she had been a lonely CEO facing an impossible ultimatum. Now she was a wife, a mother, a leader whose strength came not from isolation, but from connection. Jack found her there, his quiet approach as familiar to her now as her own heartbeat. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, slipping an arm around her waist. "I was just thinking about that Tuesday night," Victoria replied, leaning into his embrace. "If you hadn't stopped to help a drunk stranger, if you hadn't lost an earring in my car, if Lucas hadn't insisted on showing me the garden." They both smiled at the chain of small chances that had created their shared life. From the reception tent came the sound of Lucas's laughter, bright and confident, as he explained something about constellations to a group of fascinated adults. I keep waiting for it to feel strange, Victoria admitted. This life, this family. But it doesn't. It feels like I've finally come home. Jack turned her gently to face him, his expression serious despite the celebration around them. I need to tell you something. I've been offered a teaching position at Harbor Bay Science Academy, introductory physics and astronomy for middle schoolers. Victoria's surprise must have shown on her face, because he continued quickly, I've been taking night classes to finish my education degree. It's been on hold since Lisa got sick, but with your support, with our stable situation, I could finally complete it. Jack, that's wonderful. Her enthusiasm was genuine. You'd be an amazing teacher. It would mean giving up the rideshare driving, he said carefully. Less income, at least initially. Victoria laughed softly. I think we can manage. I know we can. That's not the point. Jack took both her hands in his. I wanted you to know that this isn't about your money or position. I'm pursuing this because it's what I've always wanted to do. What Lisa always encouraged me to do. You've given me the security to follow that dream, but the dream was mine long before we met. The distinction was important, Victoria realized. He needed her to understand that their relationship wasn't defined by what she could provide, that he wasn't becoming dependent on her resources. I love that you're doing this, she said simply, and I love that you trust me enough to pursue your own path alongside mine. Their kiss was interrupted by Lucas, who appeared beside them with the exaggerated disgust of childhood. You guys are being mushy again, but that's statistically normal for newlyweds, so I'll allow it. Victoria laughed, pulling him carefully into their embrace, mindful of his cast. Such generosity from our resident scientist. Well, it's a special occasion, Lucas conceded, then added more seriously, Dad, is it okay if I start calling Victoria Mom sometimes? Not all the time, because I still remember my first mom, but sometimes, when it feels right. The question hung in the air, weighted with emotional significance. Victoria felt her breath catch, not daring to look at Jack for fear of influencing his response. This was between father and son, a negotiation of memory and present reality that required delicate handling. Jack knelt to Lucas's level, his voice gentle but clear. What do you think your mom would say about that? Lucas considered this with the seriousness he brought to all important questions. I think she'd want me to be happy, and having two moms, one in heaven and one here, would make me really happy. Then I think it's more than okay, Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. It's perfect. Lucas turned to Victoria, his expression suddenly shy. Is it okay with you if I call you Mom sometimes? Victoria knelt beside Jack, bringing herself to Lucas's eye level. It would be the greatest honor of my life, she said, not bothering to hide the tears that spilled down her cheeks. Greater than any business deal, any corporate title, any professional achievement. Lucas nodded solemnly, as if finalizing an important contract. Good, because families need proper designations to function efficiently. Then his scientific gravity dissolved into a grin. Also, it's shorter than Victoria, which is statistically more efficient when I need to ask for things like snacks or telescope upgrades. Their laughter joined together. Rising into the evening air, mother, father, son. A family created through unusual circumstances, but bound by the most conventional force in the universe. Love that recognized no boundaries of time, background, or beginning. 6 months later, the Hamilton Reynolds family appeared on the cover of Business Weekly, not for a merger or acquisition, but for their innovative family-centered corporate policies. The photograph showed Victoria in her office, with Jack and Lucas clearly visible through the glass wall that separated but didn't isolate her workspace from the educational foundation they had established to support children interested in STEM careers. The article highlighted their unconventional path to partnership, not as scandal, but as blueprint, a model for integrating professional ambition with personal fulfillment, corporate responsibility with family values, strategic thinking with emotional intelligence. Some nights change everything, the article began, echoing the fateful Tuesday when a rideshare driver had helped a drunk billionaire get home safely. Some choices echo for a lifetime in the Hamilton Reynolds household. Now expanded to include a rescue dog named Cosmic and a state-of-the-art telescope on the roof deck. That particular Tuesday night had become family legend, the beginning of their unusual love story, retold with increasing embellishments at holidays and celebrations. But the real story lived in the quiet moments, Jack grading papers at the kitchen table, while Victoria reviewed quarterly projections. Lucas explaining his latest scientific discovery to whoever would listen. The three of them sharing meals and dreams, and the occasional argument about whose turn it was to walk Cosmic in the rain. It lived in Lucas's increasingly sophisticated space models, in the adoption certificate framed beside his birth certificate, in Victoria's gradual shift from corporate warrior to balanced executive as she restructured Hamilton worldwide to prioritize sustainability over endless expansion. It lived in Jack's growing confidence as an educator, in the pride with which he introduced Victoria at school functions, in the way he had stopped measuring himself against financial metrics and started evaluating success by the happiness of his family and the impact of his teaching. Most of all, it lived in the knowledge that some arrangements, begun for practical reasons, could evolve into the most profound connections that pretending to be a family could, with time and love and daily choice, create the real thing. "Do you ever regret it?" Victoria asked Jack late one night, as they stood on their roof deck watching the stars that had first connected Lucas to her. Agreeing to marry me when it was just a business proposition, Jack considered the question with the thoughtfulness that had drawn her to him from the beginning. "I regret that we felt we had to pretend," he said finally, "but I could never regret where it led us." Even with all the complications for Stone's attempted expose, the media attention, the adjustments we've all had to make, especially with all of that, Jack pulled her closer against the night chill. Those complications showed us what we were made of. Individually and together, they prove that what we built is real, not just convenient or lucrative, but genuinely strong. From inside came the sound of Lucas's voice, calling them to witness his latest astronomical discovery through the telescope he'd modified with parts from Victoria's engineering department. They went together, hand in hand, to share their son's excitement over distant galaxies and possibilities. Some nights changed everything. Some choices echoed for a lifetime, and some families, created through unconventional beginnings, proved that love was less about perfect circumstances and more about perfect commitment to growth, to honesty, to the daily choice to build something beautiful together. One ordinary day at a time.